Well, very welcome to this session, which is called The Rise of the Workplace Speech Police. Clearly, it's incredibly popular. Now, this session is is in association with Don't Divide Us. So thank you to Don't Divide Us. My name is Pamela, and I'm going to chair this session. As the name suggests, it's about the rise of the workplace speech police. And to explore that in a lot more detail, I have four very knowledgeable speakers. So I'm going to introduce them. They're going to speak for about 6 minutes maximum, and then it'll be out to you for questions, points, anything. Okay? So first to speak on my immediate right is Pamela Dow, who is the COO, Chief Operating Officer of Civic Future. Second is Paul Embery, who is the only man on the panel. So is it recognized as a firefighter?
Don't assume my gender.
Firefighter, trade unionist, broadcaster, author, who's written a book about how the left loads the British, the working class. Then we have far right, Dr. Anna Loutfi, who is the employment and human rights barrister. Anna is also on the advisory council to Don't Divide Us. And finally, we have Maya Forstater, who is the CEO of Sex Matters. So give them a resounding applause. Okay. Best not to clap after each session. We'll wait till the end, okay? Just to get more time and for more people to speak up. Pamela.
Thanks very much, Para. Despite never really thinking very hard about human resources in my life before, I'm now increasingly associated with it because of an article I wrote in the New Statesman about this time last year. I didn't think for a moment it would cause such a stir, but it did seem to provide an outlet for some pent-up frustrations. My inbox filled with people's stories of HR woe, and I've now got a book contract on the subject, so wish me luck. What interests me about this topic is the shift in the size and influence and ideology of HR, and charting the sort of social and political context in which that's taken place over the course of the 20th and 21st century. So the workplace welfare movement of the early 1900s to personnel management through the civil rights movement to what we've got now in HR. And the thesis of the book is essentially this: HR is too big. It's on a scale that I don't think people have quite recognised. We've had a 68% growth in roles since 2010. It is it's Britain's biggest growth sector. Just under 300,000 back in 2010 to just under 500,000 now. We've got more people in HR than we've got doctors, police, or any kind of lawyers. And even just aside from anything else, as many of us know from working in medium to large organisations, just people create busy work. Sheer volume creates activity. Diligent people do things. And that creates a sort of failure demand and clearances. And just there's a sclerosis that comes with volume. So that's a problem. Second point is HR is just too influential. There's been this sort of inflation in terms of the concept, but also in terms of the individual roles. So it's gone from being, as I say, personnel to strategic human resources. But the jobs have gone from, your personnel officer to your HR manager to your people director to your chief people officer. Now, chief people officers sit on boards in a way they never did before. This is the function that's controlling decisions about pay, about industrial relations, about recruitment. It's acting as a veto player. For the leadership team, is driving and creating business strategy in a way where it was created to enable a strategy. And I'm making these sweeping statements. Obviously, there's lots of organisations that are not like this, and great leaders who are not devolving things to their HR team. And the final thing is, which I think most people will be interested in today and which others on the panel are going to talk about, is just too ideological. It's got a worldview. It's the worldview you might expect from a mostly graduate, social studies bias, workforce. It's a worldview that is associated with sort of progressivism, but not, it's not necessarily capital P partisan. Although if anyone saw a brilliant piece of work that was covered in the Times yesterday by Simon Ruda's team about the sort of ideological bias of the public sector and civil service, I think, you can put quite a lot, if you applied the same analysis to human resources, you might find a similar outcome. But it's essentially a set of assumptions around fairness is a quality of outcome, not opportunity. Individual identity is elevated over duty and obligation. And that leads to, again, we'll talk about it, others in the panel will talk about it, a focus on DEI over other things. And then you get this sort of tribunal rise that Anna will talk about. Again, caveat, it's not all HR. There are companies like Octopus, like Netflix, who are not allowing this function to have this impact on company strategy. But, my experience is mostly in the last 15 years in the civil service or in adjacent organizations. And it's really a problem there. And again, I didn't start thinking about it until a couple of years ago. And the more I think about it, the more I realize what a problem it is. The combination of all of these things is a dominant workplace culture of anarcho-tyranny, some of you recognize that as Sam Francis' phrase, and procedural maternalism, which is a phrase I've coined. And I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by this. With respect to the topic we're talking about today, I think this policing of workplace speech comes in two forms. It's sort of direct and tacit. So the direct aspect of it is this expansion of codes, compliance with different sort of policies for everything, every sort of relationship between human beings that you might have has some sort of code behind it. Anne and I were just saying, the civil service handbook in the 1950s used to be this beautifully worded sort of 40-page document. I don't think anyone's tried to count how many policies there are around the civil service now, but it's tens of thousands of pieces of paper. And that leads to this sort of every single act within the workplace is policed. So any transgression of that becomes a problem that is then increasingly litigated. But the anarcho-tyranny comes from the sort of wider issues. A lot of these jobs are under an existential threat from AI. And this group just isn't thinking about what the implications of that are, but they are thinking about whether there's a menopause policy and who's policing that. And then, sorry, I've got a minute left. The tacit policing just comes of norms and expectations and orthodoxy. So no one told everyone in the civil service to start using their pronouns after their signatures. But the chief people officer at the time wrote a blog about why he did and talked about gender being assigned at birth. So people just follow the incentives within their organisation. And that's what I've sort of coined. He happened to be a guy. But this sort of procedural maternalism is a kind of this implication of care, of sort of adult-child relationships rather than adult-adult relationships, sort of agreeableness that actually takes the form of passive aggression. We all recognise it. So solution really quickly, I think you just address size by having fewer people. You can address the rest of it in other ways, but if you just cut the number, you'll go quite a long way to solving some of these problems. And then, quickly, leadership again, just, senior people step up. Great men and women of history, take responsibility for your organizations again. Stop delegating things to a function that can't bear the weight of it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I come at this very much from a trade union perspective. I'm a trade unionist to my core, have been all of my adult life, very proud to be so. I've been on strike. I've led strikes. I know and understand the importance of trade unions in the workplace. And my concern is that as workplaces have increasingly become ideological battlegrounds, trade unions have too often taken the wrong side in those battles. And as a result of that, I think they're becoming increasingly marginalized. And the truth is, many of our institutions, we're living through a period where many of our institutions have embraced the agenda of radical progressivism. Our political institutions, our local institutions, our cultural and creative and educational institutions. And the reality is that is now starting to spill over, or has spilled over recent years, into our workplaces, where employers have now, in many cases, adopted that particular agenda as well. And you see it particularly, I think, with large companies and corporations, where they're desperate to be seen as on the right side of history, to coin that terrible phrase. And they want to constantly sort of flaunt their woke credentials. They want to be seen as progressive. They want to earn social kudos, and they want to earn approval among their peers. And as that has happened simultaneously, the space within which ordinary workers can debate and discuss competing ideas and opinions, I think, has undoubtedly become narrower, to the point where, I mean, on some certain issues now, we know that employers will believe that there is a single permitted view. There's an orthodoxy from which no one dare depart. And if someone does depart from it, then they need to be sanctioned. And it's almost as if they believe that their position, that their view is objectively right, and that anybody who doesn't share it is somehow morally inferior and needs to be dealt with in that way. And that has created, I think, a kind of suffocating authoritarianism within many, not all, as we just heard, not all certainly, but certainly I've seen in many of our workplaces that atmosphere has been created. And you see it, I think, in examples where once upon a time we would say, I disagree with you. Now, increasingly, we say, you mustn't say that. That's the sort of restrictions. The merits of different and competing and sometimes contentious ideas are no longer up for discussion. And you see, and I see people in workplaces essentially keeping their heads down, even though they don't necessarily agree with a particular opinion, a particular line that the employers put in. They keep their heads down because they're worried that they're taking their reputation and possibly their careers into their hands if they don't do that. And so effectively we have speech codes, sometimes officially, sometimes unofficially, but we have speech codes within the workplaces, within our workplaces, and this kind of rigid groupthink where someone's right to voice an opinion is subordinated to someone else's right to feel offended. If someone feels offended, then the opinion should not be offered in the first place. So even if you have expressed an entirely legitimate political or moral view, and you've expressed that genuinely, somebody somewhere says, well, no, somebody has taken offence at that, and their right to feel that offence is greater than your right to say what it is that you're saying. And the truth is that trade unions have been complicit in this. I mean, we've all seen over recent years, there's been a litany of cases, we all know them, where people have been punished and sanctioned, and in some cases discriminated against for expressing what is deemed to be an unfashionable view. And trade unions have been absolutely complicit in that. Instead of being at the forefront of some of those cases, they've actually rallied behind the employer in some cases. And when some of those cases, and Maya's a great example, when some of those cases have been won by workers against employers, they have treated it as a defeat. The unions have too often treated it as a setback rather than an advance. And we've seen also, I think, with the Sandy Peggy case in Scotland, the nursing fife, once upon a time, trade unions would have been full-throatedly behind campaigns such as that, people standing up for their rights in the workplace, in this case, somebody who didn't want to be forced to undress in front of a biological man. And I know in my union, the Fire Brigades Union, has got a proud record in the past of fighting for women and fighting for advances for women in the workplace and defending sex-based rights and so on. Hardly any union that I noticed was anywhere near Sandy Peggy, and actually many of them were with the employer, right? And I think that was appalling. And in some cases, I think it's almost in some sense the tip of the iceberg. We only hear about those cases where people are willing to stand up. They're willing to resist. They're willing to take the legal action. They're willing to go to the media. There are, I am certain, hundreds, possibly thousands of similar cases that have taken place in our workplaces that don't get that sort of coverage because people just want a quiet life and they don't want the publicity, or they can't afford the legal costs and so on. And there is, as we just heard, this real sort of overlap. It's a remarkable overlap between trade unions and HR departments. I mean, in my day when I was cutting my teeth as a trade unionist, we'd often go to war with the HR department because they were the people who were often doing stuff that you know, was something that was not right and fair and beneficial to our workers. Nowadays, it's almost as if they see themselves as one. And I think that overlap is underpinned very much by the DEI agenda, which, as we know, is promoted as inclusive and tolerant and all of those kind of things. But actually, and I've seen it in the workplace, is incredibly divisive and is becoming more divisive, and is pitting worker against worker in many cases, and does the things that trade unions, you know, often ought to oppose. We should be about building solidarity between workers on the basis of their common interest, rather than supporting policies which actively promote separateness and difference, which I think DEI has now become. So we do need a campaign of resistance. I think we do need to push back against some of the extremely damaging authoritarianism that's taking place in our workplaces. I don't think, sadly, that many trade unions will be with us on it, but whether they are or they're not, I'm a trade unionist who's prepared to join that battle because it's a fight that needs to be fought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? So we all know that there is a spectre stalking Europe and Britain, the spectre of the phobia. And we've heard from previous panellists about the combined forces of HR and EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion, which is what I call an empire of inclusivity that is being built across the workplace, telling everyone at work all the different ways in which they may like to consider themselves victims of oppression. And so what we see is discrimination at work appearing on the landscape of the employment world as a huge, gross, systemic problem. HR sector studies will tell us for 2025 that 45% of UK adults have faced discrimination at work. 69% of ethnic minority employees face or have faced or experienced racial discrimination in the workplace. And according to the Don't Divide Us report, the Equality Act isn't working. We know the outcome of this industrial complex of EDI. We're seeing rises in employment tribunals under the auspices of discrimination law. We're seeing rises to the extent that I think for 2016 to 2024, the report notes some 250,000 discrimination tribunals before the employment tribunal. Now, I just want to say something as an employment lawyer about the way it actually works on the ground from the claimant's perspective, who is bringing an anti-discrimination claim in the employment tribunal. There are 7 ways, I think, in which we can say that the employment tribunal is claimant friendly, much of which has to do with the Equality Act itself, but also to do with the EDI industrial complex. First of all you need to do to file a discrimination claim is scribble on a bit of paper, "Me is discriminated," and that will get the ball rolling. You don't really need to have sophisticated particulars of claim. These can be worked out along the way. Once you've lodged a claim, off it goes, and you can have 100 million preliminary hearings where kindly judges, often working with litigants in person, will help the claimant to understand the nature of their own discrimination and identify the points at law that they wish to bring before the tribunal. So you don't really need to have a good claim. The costs in employment tribunals are borne by each side, so you don't have to worry about the other side's costs in general. So that is an incentive to claimants, but it's also a pain in the neck for employers who will have to pay out for legal costs in claims often stretching over years, whether or not the claim against them is ill-founded or not. And of course, therefore, employers are incentivized in this way to settle with claimants, and they frequently do. Even if the claim against them is spurious, they will meet claims with settlement propositions. The time limits for bringing a discrimination claim are 3 months, which is not very long time at all, but the Equality Act allows the tribunal a discretion to extend time for discrimination claims if the tribunal finds that to do so is just and equitable. To strike out a discrimination claim is incredibly difficult. Even if a claim has almost no prospects of success in the minds of a judge, it is very difficult to strike it out initially because there is a lot of case authority and policy that advises against doing anything like that until a discrimination case has been heard fully on the facts, which, as we've just heard, takes years sometimes with lots of hearings. Tests for discrimination are worded in such a way, particularly in respect of harassment, but even direct discrimination under the Equality Act, so that almost any act, gesture, word, comment, throwaway remark could be construed as somehow creating a negative or hostile environment for an employee, or unfavourable treatment of some kind. And so it's very easy for somebody who has a grievance of some kind to construct a case of discrimination or harassment around some sort of protected characteristic. We know that there are codified protected characteristics in the Equality Act, and they seem to be straightforward, I think, but they're not. But anyway, they are evolving and mutating as we speak. And so it isn't just the protected characteristics that we see in the Equality Act, there are derivative protected characteristics as well. It's a moving beast. The burden of proof moves to an employer in the employment tribunal once the claimant has established that there are some facts on which discrimination might have taken place. Then the burden of proof is on the employer to show that they have not acted in a discriminatory way. So what this shows is that there is a huge incentive for people, employees, to bring claims against their employers. It is to the credit of our judges and our system that many of these claims do not succeed finally, but that is of little comfort to the taxpayer who is funding the whole process, very little comfort to the employer who is becoming increasingly vulnerable to expensive litigation. And what I would like to end with, because my time is short, but I can elaborate on aspects of the Equality Act that are moving and driving the DIE industrial complex, such as the public sector equality duty and the paragraphs on positive action. We can talk about those later if people are interested. But what I would like to end with is a question to you, which is, if we have gross discrimination against people of all kinds based on their protected characteristics in the workplace, why then do we not see this gross number of discrimination claims in the county courts? We simply don't see it in those numbers outside of the workplace. For example, in the provision of goods and services, why, if we live in a racist society, do we not see racism in every shop, hotel and other service provider in the country? What we see is this in the workplace. That tells us something. It tells us that the workplace is becoming a kind of laboratory, a legal laboratory for engineering ideas about oppression and grievance culture that are being workshopped in the workplace and then taken to tribunals. And I think that the comparison of the county courts with the employment tribunal tells us that there's something going on here. But what it is and why it's happening, I'm going to leave to the audience to work out for themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, Maya.
Can you hear me? Last night, somebody said to me rather drunkenly, he said, "I love you. You were just a nobody, but you said no." And I thought, well, that's charming. I did actually have a career before this, but he was right. And he was also one of the organisers of the conference. But anyway, so I'm going to speak in defence of the Equality Act, obviously, because if people don't know, I was a claimant. It's not as easy as Anna makes out. And I'm going to say basically three things in defence of the Equality Act. First off, the workplace isn't a free speech domain. It never was, and it isn't. Secondly, Chesterton's fence. And thirdly, it's not just about the cases that come to tribunal. So those are my 3 points. The workplace is not a free speech domain. That's how you know you're at work. You can't swear. You can't call your boss an asshole. You can't, in general, be an asshole to your colleagues. If you work in a customer-facing role or a client-facing role, there are very clear rules and regulations about what you must say and what you must not say. So I think the problem is not the workplace speech police, because police implies rules. It's the workplace speech militia. It's the self-appointed people saying you can't say this and you can't say that outside of the rules, not the workplace rules. You need to have rules and codes about how people act at work, because otherwise they're not at work. And none of this is a breach of your human rights. And so what we've had is the workplace militia saying, you can't say this, you can't say that at work and outside of work, including things that are needed just to be able to do your job, as in to say that men are male and women are female. In my case, I lost my job basically for articulating what is the definition of sex in the Equality Act. And I think the Equality Act is hugely important. It's built on hundreds of years of anti-discrimination law. The first piece of anti-discrimination law was religion and belief. It was the Papists Act, something, long time ago. And they've gradually built up discrimination law against disability discrimination, race discrimination, sex discrimination, and that all got rolled up into the Equality Act. If you didn't have that, your workplace wouldn't be a lovely, free utopia. It would be a place where your bosses can bully, harass, and discriminate against you. That's the Chesterton's fence point. Chesterton's fence is, you buy a piece of land, there's a fence on it. Don't take that fence down until you know what that fence was for. What the Equality Act fence is for is to stop people being bullied and harassed at work because of their race, because of their sex, and so on. And I know this because after I lost my first employment tribunal, when they said that gender critical beliefs in 2019 are not worthy of respect in a democratic society, basically what they were saying was, you are not covered by the Equality Act. Your beliefs are not covered against discrimination. It is open season for people to discriminate and harass women and men who say that sex is real in the workplace. And that was overturned in 2021. And what we see with belief discrimination cases is they have a remarkable rate of success. It's very rare that you get direct discrimination cases won, because employers now don't say no blacks, no Irish. They know not to do that. But they do still say no gender critical bigots. They're learning. They can't do that. But they also can't indirectly discriminate against you by saying, we're going to allow men into the women's toilets and so on. All of that is the Equality Act. And so my third point is, it's not just about the cases that come to court. The most important thing I ever did in my life was to lose my job and to bring my case. And what that means is people say my name, because I didn't change my name when I got married, and I'm quite proud about that, because Forstater is a strange name. And people just say my name at work and it stops a grievance. So you have, there's the top of the iceberg is the people who go through 4 years as I did and win. But there's lots of people who are able to say, look, the Equality Act protects my rights to free speech, but within the workplace, free speech is a limited thing. Your employer can say no talking on the production line. That doesn't impede your human rights. And so I would just say there are no nobodies. Everybody's a somebody. Everyone can say no, and that's partly because of the Equality Act.
Thank you. Okay, so you've heard for, against the Equality Act, the impact of the Equality Act on the workplace. So very keen to hear your views, questions, particularly interested in people who are going to stand up and defend HR. Okay? Quite important, okay? Just in the context of the discussion. I want to throw in opposite arguments. Okay, but someone right at the back there? Who's having the microphones? Okay. And then, is there just one? Yeah.
Hello. Hi. I am a corporate HR leader at a global company. I lead an international team. I'm not UK based, but I do have employees in the UK, and I have to say it is so painful when I have to go through anything HR related on the negative side with my UK based employees. You have the most policies, policing, what should be done, how it should be done, down to the language of, how I can lead a conversation. So I just want to express my sympathies and frustrations. I've also had a discrimination case, which was unfounded, which we did settle because the business impact of letting this go on is just too much. So it's terrible. But I had a challenge to the first speaker who said that HR shouldn't have a seat at the top. So when you have a large organization with tens of thousands of people, the business leaders set the business strategy, the people leaders or the HR leaders marry this with the people strategy. So there is value, or at least I believe, in HR.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing to consider is HR for the people or is it for the employers? Okay, because that's the kind of thing certainly kind of raises in my mind. And I also want to hear people who are going to defend, talk about their unions and perhaps, they have done good things for them. Okay.
Right, I'm a bin lorry driver for a local authority. Yeah, I self-identify as a bin man, and if you disagree with me, that's hate speech. All right, now as a bin man, sorry, there's not multiple of me. I'm sure you'd be glad to hear. Although it might seem like that on bin day. Right, after 4 years of working for an agency for said local authority, who I won't name, I was taken on permanent and asked to come to cordially invited to a welcome meeting. Talk about shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. Anyway, I spent 45 minutes talking about what's your favourite ice cream and discussing protective characteristics, and I still can't remember half of what they said. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, one of my loaders is Jamaican. The other one, half Pakistani, half Northern Irish Mancunian. Basically a whole workplace diversity course all on his own. I've got a couple of old shopping trolleys floating in my gene pool. I'm sure they'd rather I was out on the beat with them, with the lorry, helping them to empty bins and sitting here discussing how to talk to them. It's 4 years. Oh, whoops, if I've upset you too late. On the flip side of that ridiculousness, a good friend of mine who is higher level management in the private sector, she has faced horrendous racism that's actually made her physically ill, on top of a life-threatening illness she already had. And apparently that happens a lot in higher management levels. Not so much with dustmen. If we have grievances with each other, we sort it out our own way.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi. I have a question about pronoun requests in the workplace. Usually, when someone says that they're transitioning, HR will alert everyone that they're transitioning and to respect that, and that implies that you need to use their preferred pronouns. And I was just wondering, on what basis can HR ask that? Because to what extent do other people have to participate in someone else's healthcare? I'm not a qualified medical person, and when someone's what's it called, therapist or whatever says that everyone will recognize them as their new gender, aren't aren't they speaking outside their remit? Because you know, as Maya has said, other people have rights. I have the right not to be forced to identify as a medical practitioner or something like that. Yeah, and I know, and I've heard that a lot of people are being sued because a lot of medical people are being sued because the gender stuff wasn't really thought out properly, and something about indemnity. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
I've just been through an employment tribunal. I have been discriminated against in the harassment claims. It wasn't spurious. I wasn't grievance mining. My employer discriminated against me, and I did quote Maya. It didn't stop it at the grievance stage, but hopefully it'll stop it in the employment tribunal. I'm a female engineer. Without the Equality Act, I would not have a job. I would not be in the position I'm in. So I'm really concerned by this pushback. The Equality Act isn't perfect. Let's make it better. Don't get rid of it because we'd all be in a terrible mess. But I would say from the employment, the topic was about men in Ladies Lose, really sexy conversation. Everyone was scared to talk about it at every level, even up to senior management. The union wouldn't talk to me and are actually petitioning the company to not comply with the Supreme Court ruling in the Equality Act. So it's an absolute mess, and it's a fear that nobody's actually told us not to talk about this stuff. Everybody knows not to talk about it, or their jobs will be on the line. It's an unacceptable situation.
Thank you. Yep.
A number of speakers have mentioned progressivism, and it seems to me that is the underlying source of cancel culture. So the question for me is, what is it that leads progressives to want to silence their colleagues in the workplace? And isn't there something peculiar about progressivism, which is that it's not a set of ideas based on reason or argument, like all ideas hitherto, I mean. It's really a set of ideas based upon moral certainty and seizing the moral high ground. And once you've done that, because you don't really believe in argument, because you think you're necessarily right, you're inevitably led not towards discussing your views with people, but with silencing them when they disagree. And I think you can see this so clearly with that notion of racism. All the wokester has to do is say he's racist, and therefore he has no right to be in the workplace. And of course, this moral certainty that goes with that assertion it invariably embraces a much broader form of racism, which is not what racism actually means. So like if you nowadays believe in Martin Luther King, that you should actually judge people by the content of their character, then you can be dubbed a racist, because actually, as Pamela mentioned, you now need to judge racism by outcomes. And if there is any disparity of outcome, which is potentially disproportionate against black people, never works the other way, by the way. If it's disproportionate against black people, then that's evidence of racism. And if you speak out against challenging that, because you think people should be judged on merit, then you're deemed a racist. And, you know, the progressive mindset means you therefore are a nasty person who has no place in the workplace. So for me, it's that sort of understanding of the politics behind progressivism, which really needs to be challenged. And I actually think it is being challenged, and I pay credit to people like Maya and a great many others who are fighting back. I think as we do fight back, I think a lot of these problems will melt away.
Thank you. One more, and then I'll take the panel. Any points that you want to make, and then I'll come back to you. Where's the microphone? Okay, over there.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. Good morning, rather. My name is William from the Agora Debate Club, by the way. Come and see us in the main hall. Now, Anna may have an inkling of what I'm going to say, but in a free society, if we want to be a free society, and my question perhaps goes mainly to Maya, should it not be the right of the employer to discriminate, including discriminate against views that he may find unacceptable for whatever reason?
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Okay. Pamela, I'll start with you because of that question.
I'll just take that question to the woman at the back from the global company. Doesn't surprise me at all that you're finding this country the most difficult to work in and the most complexity of policies. And I won't make a comment because others on the panel will answer this question. But I would urge everyone to think about whether that's a result of the Equality Act. My understanding of the Equality Act was that there were 9 pieces of legislation that already gave us the rights of the Equality Act, and it was a scooping up gold plating act, and that might have created precisely the problems that you're experiencing in this country compared to others, is very badly written. And yes, we could solve that by improving the text, but we could also solve it by repeal. I put to you, but the bigger point you make is a common one I've heard as well, and I can see the internal logic to it. If you are a services business, if you have a human capital organisation, why wouldn't you have a place on the board for the chief people officer or the person responsible with people? To which I probably have 2 points. What happened before? So, you read any biography of, great leaders in any sector over the last 100 years. I've recently read about Arnold Weinstock from General Electric. Every single bit of his day was management of his people. He walked around his organisation and managed his people. That's what leaders used to do. So my worry, my concern about the board's position for a discrete function of the people profession is, this is as we're discussing, an ideologically led function, but also it separates it off. It allows the slopey shoulders of the rest of the executive team. So at least couple it up with something. At least have the responsibility of people and treating your employees well alongside another function. Because if you separate it off, it will just take this sort of momentum of its own. So I politely disagree with you. I don't think it needs to be on the board for that organisation to be a good employer.
Maya. Following the Supreme Court judgment, which said that the two sexes are real, Sex Matters we've produced these postcards that say the law is clear. The law is clear on toilets. The law is clear on sport. And on the back of each of them, it's got a QR code and it tells you what the law says. We haven't done one on pronouns, and that's for a reason. There has not yet been a good test case on pronouns, and I'm not recommending that anyone in this room is the person who takes that test case.
Watch this space, Maya.
Yeah. Which is why we haven't done a postcard. I think it's very clear that if your employer asks you to put your own pronouns in your bio or announce them on your email or announce them in a meeting, you can say, no, thank you. That's not my practice. And that should be absolutely safe. Because of what I said about your workplace is not a free speech zone. If you work in a restaurant, they can say you must call everyone sir and madam, and you can have codes about how you refer to people. There needs to be some good pronoun test cases before people can feel safe using clear pronouns at work. I think one of the places where this is going to play out is in schools, because that's one of the places where schools have all adopted, coming down from either from Stonewall or from official guidance, this policy that says if a child says they're the opposite sex, then everyone has to treat them with those pronouns. So it's exactly what you're saying, that they are making the other pupils be healthcare, voluntary healthcare, to this idea that you should affirm children. I think it's very clear now that the law is clear on toilets and the law is clear on sport. So in a school, they must now tell children, however you feel about yourself, you cannot change sex. You cannot use the opposite sex toilets. You cannot play the opposite sex sport. And in order to say that to a child, in order to say that to the other staff and to have those rules and make them clear for the 12 years of your schooling, you can't then call a boy she or a girl he. So it may be that the test case plays out in school, but I would, unless you want to be the test case, I can't yet say the law is clear on pronouns, but we're getting clearer. My case was just about my ability to say on social media, while the government was having a consultation about the Gender Recognition Act, we should be able to talk about this. My workplace, it had like one toilet on each floor. It wasn't a very big office, so we didn't have the toilets debate. But because I won that, Maria at Leonardo is able to say she wants female-only toilets. And because because she's going to win that, I hope, it then means, and we've already won toilets cases in school in Scotland, that once you have a rule, you need to be able to have the language to articulate that rule, and that language includes pronouns. So I think we will get there, but I'm not yet at the point of saying the law is absolutely clear on pronouns. And then, sorry, I just wanted to answer the guy who said, I mean, if you're a libertarian, you could say employers should have the right to discriminate against their staff. It's a democratic choice. Do you want to have workplaces where people are allowed to say no Jews, no Catholics? It's a choice. And, my choice is no.
Okay, Paul?
Thank you. A couple of points, if I may. I'm broadly supportive of the Equality Act. I think it is important to have laws in the country which prohibit employers and service providers from discriminating against people, and Maya just summed it up there perfectly, on the basis of things like, their biological sex, their age, their race, etc. I think it's important to have those protections. I think the contentious part of the Equality Act is Part 11, because that's the part that provides for positive action, as they call it. And when we see stories in the media about how companies, employers have got away with, for example, advertising jobs and saying only people from an ethnic minority background may apply. We've all seen those instances. It's because of Part 11 that they're able to do that, not because of the Equality Act as a whole, but because of Part 11, because Part 11 enshrines their right to look at a group of people with a protected characteristic and to where they conclude that that particular group has different needs to other groups or is at a disadvantage. I mean, who knows what they mean by disadvantage, but is at a disadvantage, then an employer, for example, can take the action it deems necessary to remedy that disadvantage, to provide for those different needs. And that's how they get away with it. It's the positive action element of Part 11 of the Equality Act, which time and again allows employers to do the contentious things that they do. I think most people in the country are probably broadly supportive, as I am, of the Equality Act generally. They probably think it's not right that you can be discriminated against because of your age, your sexuality, and so on. But people do get angry when they see those stories where, for example, white people are just scrubbed out and told you cannot apply for this. Or when it comes to, things like promotion as well, that's also covered within Part 11. So I think it's that particular part that needs to be looked at. DEI, I had a conversation once with a senior officer. I work in the fire service. I had a conversation with a senior officer, a guy who was also a union rep at one time. I got on with him quite well. And he was the chair of the Equalities Committee of our employer, which it was a standing committee, and it met, I think, once a month. And he had taken over, I don't think he volunteered for the role, but he'd taken over as the chair of it. And I was having a chat with him, and this is how it works, and I think this is the problem. He described it to me, he said it's a never-ending treadmill. He said, because most employers now, especially big employers, feel they have to have these standing committees, these equality committees that meet, once a month or whatever. He said, and even though you've achieved a lot as a company and as an organisation, in terms of tackling discrimination, nobody ever wants to disband a committee because that would look bad. So the committee continues to meet. And he said, the problem is we turn up each month and we talk about how well we've done, and, we have done well, and, confronting prejudice and whatever. He said, but you have to come up with something to do next. He said, you can't, because you've got to continue to show that you're relevant and that you're doing your work. He said, so it becomes like a ratchet effect. We're constantly, or he said they, the committee members, are constantly looking for the next progressive thing to do. Because they feel that they can't close the meeting without saying, well, we've done this, we've got pronouns on badges now, that's brilliant. What are we going to do? What are we going to do next? And that's how you get, I think, to some of the extreme kind of initiatives that we see in workplaces because of these committees, because it is a never-ending treadmill, and because they are constantly looking at the next thing to do. And that's where I think it needs to be confronted. And that's where trade unions, I think, are lacking, in the sense that they completely fail to see how DEI as a concept has become so divisive, has moved away from what it was intended to be at the beginning. Some people would argue, I think, that what it was intended to be is what it is now. But until trade unions recognise that, they'll continue, and I think that they'll continue peddling a dogma that I think cuts against the wishes of so many of their members, and that's what I see in the workplace.
Anna?
So the elephant in the room, obviously, when we listen to Maya talking about her case and the recent judgment by the Supreme Court, is, of course, the gender reassignment protected characteristic. Because, you can scream from the rooftops that there is very clear law on sex. But, I mean, if you've got another protected characteristic that stands side by side with sex, called gender reassignment, then the law had better be bloody clear on what that is and how it's different. And of course it isn't clear, and no one can tell me that it is. We all can, as adult, intelligent beings in this room, know what Parliament might have had in mind. Although we could say, for example, that when gender reassignment was put on the table, there was a demographic in mind, okay? And I'll leave it to you guys to just work out what you think that demographic is. But shall we say, for the sake of argument, that it's not considered to be a very significant demographic if we think about a demographic such as the female workforce, okay? And yet we find ourselves in a position where the Equality Act, which is the reason you got into trouble, because that's where gender reassignment comes from. And not just gender reassignment, but, the other protected characteristics as well. And if we look at, I think sex is perhaps the exception that proves the rule, because it is, I think, extremely clear what it refers to. All right. But that's not the case with the majority of the protected characteristics. We don't know in law what a disability is or where the line should be drawn. For example, when it comes to workplace anxiety or pressure or work-related stress, and what is to be considered a disability under Section 6 of the Equality Act. We're not sure at all what race refers to. We really don't know how to define race versus religion and vice versa. We don't know, for example, how to qualify the concept of belief. And it takes somebody like Maya to drag a codified worldview that has been named gender critical thinking before a judge and have the judge rubber stamp it and say that's protected. But then that doesn't tell us what is protected. It just tells us that that's protected. And we don't know if we're gender critical and we agree with Maya on 80% of what she says, but not on 20% of what she says. Are we covered as gender critical thinkers if we don't exactly adhere to the same worldview of the gender critical thinkers that came before us in the tribunal? The point I'm trying to make is that the protected characteristic is fluffy. And what we've seen, and this is what Paul was talking about, are industrial systems of operating which take the idea of a protected characteristic, right, like gender reassignment, which the intentions of Parliament probably had in mind to cover people who were considering going through some sort of surgical arrangement in order to live as the opposite sex. And we've seen policies explode up and down the country using terms like trans or LGBT or LGBTQ plus or non-binary And these are all somehow linked, but we don't know how, to the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. And they just leave us completely impotent to talk about sex. So even the esteemed Supreme Court can say in black and white, sex is binary, end bloody of. Gender reassignment continues to muddy the waters, and no one will dare define it. We don't know whether it means surgery. We don't know whether it means considering surgery. We don't know whether it means living like this. We don't know whether it means whether it encompasses the use of language. We don't. You've just said there's been no test case. So what I'm saying is, it's a ludicrous and preposterous approach to society to have protected characteristics. And I think that with the case of menopause, for example, which can be now considered a disability, or it could be part of one's sex, or it could be part of one's age, we see that the protected characteristic philosophy worldview is to codify every aspect of life into some sort of potential grounds for discrimination. And it's not workable, and it's costing you guys more than you know.
Okay. I'm going to allow Maya to come in here before I come out to the audience, but quickly, right?
I mean, we got where we are through misunderstanding of the law, and I think we should be very careful with it. We do know that gender reassignment doesn't mean surgery because it says that in the law, and that is part of the reasoning of the Supreme Court in Forum Scotland. They said this protected characteristic means what it says on the packet, which is, proposing to go through some process to change some aspect of your sex or gender. Well, that's not exactly the right words. But the thing about protected characteristics is, race is fluffy. Like, you cannot define race. We're not going to live in a society where you define people's races, but we know there is race discrimination. We know there is racism. And you can't say just because you can't put people into racial boxes that you shouldn't protect people against losing their job or being bullied or harassed at work because of their race. And the point about bringing a claim is you're not saying treat me differently, treat me specially because of my race or because of my sexual orientation. You're saying if you treat me unfairly at work in a way that you shouldn't because I'm gay, because I'm black, because I'm Jewish, whatever, then it's that unfairness that is being tested in court. It's not, sex is a different kind of protected characteristic because everyone has one, it's on your birth certificate, it doesn't change, but the other protected characteristics are not. But the harm that discrimination causes is real.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Let me see all your hands. Okay. Alka, and then if you give her the mic, and then where's the other rolling mic? Alka is at the back. You got it. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So Alka Segal-Cuthbert, I'm co-author of the report on Don't Divide Us on the Equality Act, and we are calling for sections of it to be repealed and for a wholesale review. And the reason we're doing that, I think, is following on from what Anna was saying, which is, and also it's really surprising to hear a trade unionist see the Equality Act at such face value, because a worker's right in the context of class politics is very, very different to having a protection issued up from on high in the context where class politics is more or less dead and identity politics rules rife. And that means that the law, and the idea that the Equality Act was a mere technical bundling up of discrimination law that was formed in an era of class politics, and was presented in very different philosophical and legal grounds to the way the Equality Act encourages us all to see ourselves and present ourselves to the courts. Does that not? Oh, it's your phone. It utterly actually dissolves the whole idea, really, of a worker's right. Right? You don't have a right. What you have is a personal attribute that, depending on the arbitrariness of the cultural predilections of the day, may be favoured or ignored or stigmatised, and then you're incentivised to present yourselves as that. And what our report does is actually look qualitatively and quantitatively to see how this plays out, where you see you see the grievances which are cultural and political, but you also see very real material grievances from workers who are facing 0-hour contracts, a massive rise in agency working, really poor communications within the system, when changes aren't disseminated widely enough, quick enough, so workers fall foul of things without even knowing it. All kinds of practical things that the old trade unions would have been on top of, but of course they've collapsed, and now we're being told that this is a substitute. It's absolutely divisive, and it's the end of equality in the workplace.
Okay, yourself?
Hi. I wanted to ask a question about what the panel thinks maybe the economic consequences might be of sort of the human resources industry sort of maybe losing people. If we see a future where I think at the moment repealing the Equality Act is Reform UK policy, and I'm not sure if it's Conservative Party policy yet, but it seems like they're inching in that direction. So if we have an eventuality where a government comes in, repeals the Equality Act, what are the panel's views on how that would sort of impact the economy more widely? I think Pamela was saying in her opening remarks that the HR industry is the fastest growth industry in the UK. So that's potentially a lot of people who are going to be out of a job if the incentives are removed. Do you think? Yeah. Do you think we then suddenly have some burst of economic growth and everything is okay, or do you think that actually the sort of realities of doing that and sort of lots of people losing their jobs could be a barrier to reform?
Okay, so that's quite an interesting question. Another question also would be, people actually at the workplace, HR in particular, will argue that DEI and the Equality Act, the impact and everything else or diversity, if you like, is very good for business. And be interesting to see, because that's the rationale that people give. The lady behind you, give the mic to her, please.
Oh, hello. I just wanted to say, isn't part of the problem that sort of feeds into the kind of culture of the place, which is affinity groups, which is having people, whether they meet in their LGBTQ++ group or their different groups, and the flags and the kind of, because that's an easy way to keep people quiet. I mean, I'm just listening, to what other people were saying, but it just feeds it and kind of mines a grievance.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you speak. And then microphone, go on.
I come from a small business background, ran a small business for 30 years. And every job is marginal in a small business. You've got to see whether you're going to make enough money to take somebody on. I think pretty much everybody who's spoken's come from large organisation backgrounds, public sector. And the biggest problem I think we've got 6.5 million people who aren't economically active. And I don't know any young people setting up businesses, employing people, hardly. There are so many barriers, so many fears to employing people. And everything you hear today would just make you think it's not worth the risk. So there may be benefits in saying that in certain cases somebody's defended when their rights have been trampled on. But overall, it contributes to this thing where, Europe is the slowest growing of all the 5 continents in the world. We're not creating businesses, and I think we should weigh that in the balance.
Thank you. Yep.
Half a word in defense of HR, partly because some of my best friends are in HR, but more importantly, because I don't think the problems we're discussing of workplace speech policing is a problem that comes from within HR. It's not something that they've sort of, HR people got together and said, we want to, dominate the workplace and take over management and get on the board and, we're going to just police everybody. Rather, I think we have to see it as this growing influence of HR in business as a symptom of a cultural change over the last sort of half century or so, which I think was very well summed up by the bin man around the corner, saying in the old days, and perhaps in her workplace today, when we had problems between people, we used to sort them out ourselves by chatting to people and talking to people. And that is the direction of that is what has changed, and that we now are supposed to be living in a world where we're not supposed to trust each other, where rather than being able to sort things out ourselves, everything needs to be codified and rules-based and regulated. That's what we mean by saying, we've moved into a regulatory society. So it's not just within the workplace, it's more broader than that it's assumed, and this is where I think the problem starts, the rot starts at the top. It's the political class has said, we don't trust people anymore, and we don't trust you to do anything. We don't trust you to have a say on immigration or have a say in sorting out your own problems. We are going to codify things and legislate things. That's why the equality law, this sort of coming together of all the previous pieces, is a symptom of that legalistic way of trying to control people's behavior, of trying to control the way we are. And so it starts then with the elite not trusting us. And I think that is what creates all these frictions within the workplace, outside the workplace, and gives an opening for people in HR to manage these things. I mean, the problem that the leadership of business goes along with that as well means that they open the doors to them to come into the boards, because they also don't really trust each other and don't trust people.
Thank you. Okay. Put up your hands, all of you, right? You have to be quite quick, okay? If I'm going to take you all. There's some, yes, yourself, sir, right at the end.
Hi, I disagree with part what that last contributor said about not holding HR to account. I've actually worked in HR for over 30 years now. Stone me later. But I have to say, I'm increasingly ashamed of my own profession. As always has been said, we've grown massively, typically beyond the point of usefulness. But even more important than that, we've become a function of activists. That is never what HR was meant to be. And I think it's really down to business owners and employers to start pushing back against HR, because we're not going to change. As long as the CIPD...
Into the mic.
It's gone off. Oh, no. As long as we have the CIPD, and if any of you just go to the CIPD website, read their statements, read the stuff that they're putting out to the profession, they are a large part of the problem. So I think until the CIPD changes or HR professionals have an alternative professional body, HR are not going to change themselves.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Yep, go on.
Hi, my name's Alex. I work in recruitment, mainly in FMCG and consumer goods. I was going to make the exact same point about the CIPD being the major reason why HR departments are so captured, especially in the public sector, because they also pay their subscription for the CIPD. So it's a self-fulfilling thing. However, the other thing that I noticed, particularly amongst young people, and I'm not tarring all young people with the same brush, is that they're coming through with a very quite fragile and brittle, and a sense of entitlement and a sense of, they've gone through school, being asked how they are and how their mental health is and how they're feeling. And they come into the workplace expecting that it's going to be the same. And it's not. They're there for a purpose and they're there to help the business make money. And they seem to not understand that. So this is where a lot of this grievance is coming from, that, you're damaging my mental health. You're expecting me to work too hard. My hours are too long. No. We get all of this stuff coming through. And I think leaders and managers, senior managers in particular, really need to focus on this aspect of coaching and mentoring young people to develop resilience in the workplace and manage the regular stresses of work without running to HR. Okay.
God.
In terms of organisational diktats to staff,
In
terms of organisational diktats to staff, is it okay, or how do we feel about a government agency at CEO level instructing everybody that they are now part of an anti-racist organisation and that they must be attending sessions in which an activist will actually tell them it's not good enough to just not be racist. You must also now be an ally or an activist too, and start referencing the wheel of intersectionality and lecturing people. That.
Go on.
Yes, hi, I'm Sue. About 20 years ago, the function of HR was to benefit the companies themselves, the actual employers. And yes, you wanted to keep employees happy, but only because you wanted to reduce staff turnover. So it was a benefit to them rather than a function for the employees themselves. But then I think the beautiful gift of DEI was that people would now have the power, people within HR would have the power to create more jobs, create more power for themselves, create more influence, create more policies, and make HR, and as you say, get seats onto the board. But the problem with this is, the grown-ups need to come back into the room to actually remind everyone what is the purpose. And the purpose of it is, how is this boosting the bottom line? And we have not seen any substantial reports on how this push towards DI is actually boosting growth, boosting productivity. How are the grown-ups going to come back into the room? What's going to empower them to shut down unnecessary staff networks and actually focus back on the actual business itself?
I think that's quite an important point, because I haven't seen any real evidence to show that DEI and all this stuff increases productivity and business is really good and booming. If anything, I've seen the opposite. More and more people saying they're stressed, they're this, they're that. Okay? Louder.
Hello? Oh, yeah, there you go. Just on the Equality Act, Mayor, obviously you used it as a tool to benefit you, but you were using it, to my mind, to fight another aspect of the Equality Act, which is, as Anna said, gender reassignment surgery. And the reason why so many people who just believe that sex is real are being discriminated against is because all it takes is for one trans person in the staff who could sue, basically, and everybody's scared about how to act around that person. So I don't understand how, to me, the Equality Act, yes, we found a way of using it to benefit our side, but the problem was the Equality Act in the first place because of this gender reassignment protected characteristic. And it's still, you were saying you don't have a card about pronouns because we don't know where the law is on pronouns because of the protected characteristic of gender reassignment surgery. Because if you use the wrong pronoun, then that person could sue or you could be hauled into HR. So to me, the Equality Act just needs to be, we just need to get rid of it completely. And then we wouldn't have needed gender reassignment. We wouldn't even needed gender critical beliefs as a protected belief in itself.
Okay.
So I have women in the workplace.
Okay. I can only take a couple more. That's it. Okay. Yes. Yes. Go on. And then.
I think this is one.
Okay. Very quick, short point, please.
The biggest failure of the Free Speech Union, in my view, is Sean Corby. Corby should probably have had whistleblower protections, not just his, free speech related dispute at work. The ACAS, I believe, sacked him because he went to the press and discussed what they were doing, because this helps everybody in the country. If you now go to ACAS for arbitration, ACAS now has to explain why a load of their staff were sort of creating racist centralist groups and harassing someone like Corby. Now, I can't speak to you because I work for Pamela City Council, which is obviously a £5 billion local authority, and my employer is now threatening me and saying I can't speak to you. So I need some kind of legal protection to actually do that.
Okay. A final. Okay. I'm going to take. You go very quickly. Quick point.
Yes. So just to carry on with the lady over there about the Equality Act. Effectively, I don't see how you can have an Equality Act that has protected characteristics by definition not equal. And then the Part 11 again, same thing. We're going to encourage people to be treated differently. It's not equality.
Okay. Final. Yeah. Really quick. 1 point. Okay. 1 minute. Not.
Hello. I worked in HR in the 1990s, and I think the problem has become when HR sees itself and a business as its own right. I worked in large-scale recruitment and development, and the motto was very much, if you recruit the best people and you provide the best training, you create the best client service, and then that in turn means that you recruit more best people. And we believe that meritocracy, and it's stated in the brochures, this is back in the 90s, was paramount. And ultimately, if you don't focus on meritocracy, you lead to mediocrity. And I think DEI has allowed HR to lose the plot and completely misunderstand what it's there for. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay. 1 minute. Okay. 1 minute. Yeah. Yourself. Yeah.
Okay.
In reverse order, I'm going.
Okay. I think equality is a really, that's what we want, but people are different. And if you repeal the Equality Act, what you end up with is the sex discrimination, the race discrimination, all the other acts that were there before, which is 95% of the Equality Act anyway. So then you say, okay, repeal all of that and don't have any protections, treat everyone the same equally. So for example, in sport, you just say the fastest person wins, the strongest person wins. There's no women's sport then. There is no women's sport if you don't say women are different from men. They need something special. They need positive action. That's what women's sport is, positive action. If you say it's equal, the fastest person wins, it's equal, the people who don't carry babies for 9 months get all the jobs, you don't have women in the workplace. That's what you have. So that's why the Equality Act is difficult. That's why it's 200 pages. It basically says don't discriminate against people apart from when you need to in order to make life fairer. And those questions are difficult, but they can't be answered just by saying get rid of the whole thing and have no recognition that people are different.
Okay, thank you. Anna, 1 minute.
Look, I haven't got the capacity to say what I want to say in 1 minute. I referred previously to the workplace as some sort of laboratory, and I do think it is. There's a kind of social engineering process, which we can see clearly if we look at the case of George Floyd. There was a hysterical response to an individual situation in the United States, which resulted in a spike of employment tribunal claims in this country, with people suddenly defining themselves in ways that they hadn't done before, namely as black. People don't define themselves as black in this country. They have more complex, nuanced identities than that, which are cultural and linguistic and historical and community-based. So when we see something in the media that may or may not get tacit encouragement from government and broad quangos organised up and down the country and funded by God knows who to push an agenda such as Black Lives Matter, it then gets workshopped at work as a form of identity politics. The same happens with trans. And what we see in the Equality Act, furthermore, under the auspices of the public sector equality duty and positive action schemes, is the requirement that employers be proactive, as the gentleman said about allyship schemes, proactive in getting everybody in the organisation to understand what race means, what equality means, what oppression means, what these identities mean, and to have everybody sign up to schemes at work whereby everybody's on the same page. And I don't understand it. We don't find it outside of the employment world. So it has to do with the way in which the employment world is becoming a laboratory, a laboratory for workshopping a global workforce, which is increasingly disempowered, has no bargaining power whatsoever, doesn't operate collectively against the employer, doesn't have any bargaining power against government, but sees itself as this broken, individuated element that has to be constantly co-opted into political schemes in order to be safe. And it's wrong.
Thank you. I would repeal, I've already said, Part 11 of the Equality Act. I think you, by doing that, would cripple the DEI industry at a stroke, and I think it's important to do that. I don't think we should be considering abolishing the Act in its entirety. I don't want to see people discriminated against in the workplace, passed over for promotion, whatever, because they're Jewish, because they supported Brexit, because they have particular politics and so on. And I think if it were repealed in its entirety, then essentially we would be giving carte blanche to people who at the moment are peddling some of these mad initiatives to become even more radical, because they wouldn't be prevented by the law from doing so. And I think we do need to consider that. I think we can have a broad movement against some of the divisive dogma of DEI and to push back against it without necessarily eroding some of the protections that workers have got at the moment. And that's the crucial thing. We need to be pushing back hard against, wokery, radical progressivism, DEI in the workplace, all of this stuff which is suffocating workplaces and is resulting in discrimination amongst workers day after day. Push back against that while protecting individual rights in the workplace. That, for me, as a trade unionist, is the key thing.
Thank you. Finally,
I'll try and answer the first three questions. It was so far ago. One minute, right? And very, very quickly. So I'm also worried about people losing their job. It's a £19.6 billion sector. I believe in the dignity of work very, very strongly. But I also don't think that you should build factories for people to build tractors that don't work. So if these are non-jobs, we need to work out why people are going into non-jobs. And as I mentioned, there is an elite overproduction of universities. Maybe we try and encourage people to think differently about what sort of job is valuable. And that links to the affinity networks point. You know, I think people have got time to spend setting up these networks because they don't have real jobs. And Phil, I'm with you. It's obviously not wholly about HR. It's obviously about a regulatory culture and a compliance culture. But it does just make me think about the NRA, the National Rifle Association. You know, yes, of course, MHR is downstream of law and other things. But when the NRA says, you know, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But we could have some fewer guns. So let's have some fewer HR people.
Okay, thank you. Very quickly, this report, you can pick it up at the stall upstairs. So please do visit the stall and read the report. There are more sessions on DEI. There's a walk at the workplace tomorrow, a podcast. So give us a loud applause and thank you.